Hello, it's Jaden here again, your favorite teen pianist and music content creator or whatever. And I teach piano. I think some of you know that. Recently, I had a very inquisitive student who asked me, why is there no E sharp or B sharp? She asked it just like that. And I happened to stumble upon a video by David Bennett. So we're going to watch it because when she asked me that, I was like, is that really necessary for you to know? Is that what's running through your head? Anyways, I'm gonna watch this video, and next time we have a lesson together, I'm going to be able to tell her. So let's watch it.
In Western music, we have 12 unique pitch classes, 12 notes. 7 of these notes are named after the first 7 letters of the alphabet.
Yes.
Then we also have these 5 extra notes shoved in between the 7 alphabetical notes. These are the black notes. These black notes each have 2 names. Depending on context, they are either the sharp of the note to their left, for example, C sharp, or they are the flat of the note to their right, for example, D flat. But a question that every musician has asked at some point is, why is there no black note in this gap or this gap? Why is there no B sharp and no E sharp? Or why is there no C flat or F flat? Well, the first step to understanding why there is no note in these 2 gaps is to first ask, why are there gaps here in the first place?
I like how he explains it really simply. Like that's actually exactly how the lecture went, and then it led to that question. Talking about how each one is called a sharp or a flat, and it's based on context. But now that I think about it, the question is super interesting because realistically, they could have done that, you know? It wouldn't really change anything. I guess it would look too uniform, but other than that, like what's stopping them? What stopped them at first from putting that into the design, you know? Cuz it's kind of asymmetrical, you know? It has the group of 2 and then the group of 3, and it's like the split in the middle isn't equal on both sides, and they definitely could have made it equal on both sides. So like, well, why not? You know, like, why not?
Could arrange our 12 notes, our 12 standard notes of Western music, like this, with no gaps at all. Wouldn't this make more sense? After all, it would make the octave physically narrower so the human hand could play wider intervals, wider chords, and we could still work out which note is which by marking one of them in red, like we do on a harp. Well, the reason that we don't arrange our keyboard like this, and instead use this familiar layout with the 2 gaps, all comes back to one major part of Western music, the major scale. As you probably know, the white notes on the piano actually make a major scale. If we play all of the white notes from C to C, we get a C major scale. And as you may have guessed, this is not a coincidence. The layout of the keyboard ultimately stems from the major scale and its importance in Western music. All major scales follow a pattern of tone, tone, semitone, tone, 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 semitone. That's literally the gaps between the notes that defines the major scale. A semitone.
See, I don't know why I didn't think of this. This is actually, like, I feel kind of dumb now. That's so sensible. That makes so much sense. Since it stems from the major scale, they just did it out of convenience. But even then, they could have made it inconvenient, and then we learned how to make it more convenient by like getting used to it. So it's still interesting that they chose to have it based on the actual major scale.
Is the smallest interval we use in Western music, and a tone is just 2 semitones. So the short answer for why we don't have a note in this gap or this gap is because there is, so to speak, no note there. There's no room to fit another note in. The notes C and D, for example, are a tone apart, 2 semitones, so there is space in between to fit another note, D flat or C sharp. Same goes for between D and E, F and G, G and A, and between A and B. But because E and F are only a semitone apart, and B and C are only a semitone apart, and the semitone is the smallest interval we use in Western music, we can't have a note in between E and F or between B and C. These notes are already as close as possible within our Western system. So if we're going to keep the semitone as our smallest interval, we don't actually need a note between E and F or B and C. But even if Western music uses the semitone as its smallest interval, from a pitch perspective, from a frequency perspective, there is still technically space between E and F or B and C.
This is what I was going to say, because technically they could fit a note in there that wouldn't be a part of our normal 12-tonal scale, but what would be considered a microtone, but it wouldn't be a microtone if they originally put that into the music, you know? So it's really interesting that that was a deliberate choice. So while the short answer is really simple, and that's probably all I'm going to tell my student, and hopefully no other further questions arise, there is more to it, you know?
To fit another note, there are intervals smaller than semitones. We just don't commonly use them in Western music. If we cut the interval of a semitone in half, we can get a quarter tone, giving us space to fit another note in between these notes. These would be what we call half sharps. For example, we'd have a B half sharp or an E half sharp. In fact, we could have an extra note between any of the notes on our keyboard, not just in these gaps. We could have a G half sharp or a D half sharp. We could even refer to these notes by different names. We could call our B half sharp a C half flat if we wanted to. These half sharp or half flat notes are called microtonal notes.
Yes.
Notes smaller than those that we usually get in Western music. If you'd like to learn more about microtonality, I've got a whole video on it here. However, this still doesn't explain why we base the layout of our musical keyboard and musical system around the major scale. To find out why Western music theory is built around the major scale, or what we can call the diatonic scale, we need to go back to what is generally considered to be the start of formalised Western music theory, plain chant. Plain chant, also known as Gregorian chant, was the music sung by monks and nuns from at least as early as the 8th century. At this time, the music was monophonic, meaning it was just melody, no chords, one note at a time. The music was also exclusively diatonic, meaning it only used the 7 notes of the major scale. Now, to be clear, the 12-note chromatic scale that we use today did exist at this time, but historically you wouldn't use all 12 notes of the scale in one composition like we might today. Instead, the black notes were effectively alternative versions of notes from the major scale. That's why the 12 notes of the keyboard aren't named after the first 12 letters of the alphabet. You had your 7 main notes, A, B, C, D, E, F, G, and then you might use an alternative version of one of those notes. So the black notes didn't really deserve their own distinct alphabetical note name. Now, as a brief aside, you might be thinking, if all of this plain chant...
That's cool, because it kind of answers multiple questions at the same time. Because I see why it makes sense for them to use that layout. Because the black keys are so irrelevant, it makes sense to use that layout, you know? I think that it's not only smart, but it's definitely really useful for them to lay out the keyboard like that. It's like they intended for it to be user-friendly.
Was just using the 7 notes of the major scale and didn't even have any chords. Surely it all sounded really samey. Well, this is actually where modes come from. Just because we're limited to the 7 diatonic notes, the white notes, doesn't mean we're stuck in the major scale. We could use a mode of the major scale. For example, if we use all of the white notes but treat A as our tonic note, we are now using the Aeolian mode, the A minor scale. Or we could treat D as the tonic note and we're now singing in D Dorian. This is where our idea of modes comes from, and is why they're often referred to as the church modes. But anyway...
This is so interesting because I always wondered about modes because I always knew what they were, but I kind of struggled seeing like the actual use of it, especially now. I guess it was definitely more important of something back in the day, but like right now, like, so what, you know?
Back to the topic at hand. As I was saying, the musical system of the time was based around just using 7 notes, the white notes. So when did they start using some notes from beyond the diatonic scale? When did they start using what we would call black notes? Well, although I just said that Gregorian monks just used the 7 diatonic notes, they did actually sometimes use one other note. They would sometimes swap B natural for B flat. The main reason they did this was to resolve the issue of the tritone between the notes F and B. As you might have heard before, at this time the tritone was considered an undesirable interval. So, for example, if you were a 10th century monk and you'd just written this melody, well, you're going to need to fix it because currently we have a tritone here between the note F and the note B. So how do we turn this undesirable dissonant tritone into a desirable consonant interval like a perfect fourth
that makes
or
a
a
lot of
perfect fifth?
sense.
Well, by swapping the B natural for a B flat. This is where Western music got its first
nice.
black note. With the option to swap B natural for B flat, we can now have a nice consonant perfect fourth or perfect fifth anywhere in the scale. But why did they call this new note B flat? Well, that's largely because this new note wasn't seen as a new addition to the 7 pitches, but instead was an alternative version of B. The monks wouldn't have sung B and B flat in the same piece of music, they would have used one or the other. So the piece would still be based on just a set of 7 notes. So we now have one of our 5 black notes. But how did we wind up with the other 4, and why only 4 more? Well, the next black note that was added was E flat.
E flat.
As I mentioned before, plain chant was initially monophonic, i.e. it had no harmony, no chords. It was just a single, unaccompanied melody. However, as early as the 9th century, harmony began to be used. The earliest example of harmony was what's called organum. This was when the main melody would be harmonized by another voice, simply singing the same melody, but a parallel 5th or 4th below it. So, for example, if we take that melody that we had before, we could add a voice singing a 5th below it, like this. And this is where we encounter the need for an E flat note. See, here, the interval between these 2 notes,
So it's kind of just like the whole pattern of we started really simple, now we're getting more complicated, so we're gonna need more items, we're gonna need more tools in order to do what we need to do, you know? And that's kind of the whole concept of like music. Like even nowadays, like there's some songs, there's some people who use like microtonal things for music, and I think that's so cool. It's kind of crazy to think that there's the possibility of a day where the piano will be like useless because it just won't have enough tones to create complex enough music for us to enjoy. And I don't think that's soon or anything, but because the piano, obviously it's been around for a really long time, but I think it's really interesting that people will probably want to enjoy something more complex, because obviously I don't think they really saw that coming before, and music just develops and gets more complex as we have more creative minds here. 2-note harmonies must have sounded crazy to people back in the days. Like I could see someone hearing 2 notes, they're like, there's something wrong with your choir. They're not all singing the same note. I think somebody needs to get fired. And then there's also something beautiful about someone hearing it and being like, you know what? Maybe we should add a 3rd note to that. And that's where I'm assuming it develops into. And maybe we should start doing things other than perfect fifths. Maybe we should add perfect thirds. Maybe we should add fourths, you know? We should change it up, you know? So I think it's super interesting, all this stuff and the development of music, because you can see it goes in a direction. As I was saying, super cool if musicians decide that music should be almost entirely microtonal. But also, I think it would be really cool for the piano to still exist as like a vintage item. And again, not soon in the future, probably like way in the future. Like I'm talking, it's robots and AI, you know?
The E and the B flat is our old foe, the undesirable tritone. So to give us a nice perfect fifth below the B flat note here, we're going to have to flatten our E, giving us our next flat note, E flat. So we've now got B flat and we've also got E flat. But what about the others? Well, it isn't clear exactly when our other black notes began to be used. And of course, the practice of music varied from place to place, so it wasn't like there was one big decision made to add new black notes. Even the addition of the B flat and E flat that we've discussed before would have happened at different times in different places. Yeah. But ultimately, the reason that the last 3 black notes were added was due to ever more complex use of harmony. Over the coming centuries, harmony would evolve from just 2 voices moving together like this into full polyphony, with various voices moving with their own independent motion. Now, although the tritone was becoming a more acceptable choice of harmony at this time, composers still needed and wanted to be able to build a lovely perfect fourth or perfect fifth above or below any given note. So, for example, if they wanted to have a note a fourth above this E flat note, well, they need to use an A flat note. So now we have an A flat. And of course, we also want to have the option to build a perfect fourth above this note, above this A flat note. So we're going to need a D flat. And now I also want to be able to have a perfect fourth above our D flat note, which requires a G flat. And furthermore, I also want to have the option to have a note a fourth above the G flat note. Well, luckily, we don't actually have to add another note this time. Okay, we already have a note a perfect fourth above G flat, B. So now with this set of 5 black notes, we can actually have a perfect fourth or a perfect fifth above or below any other given note. So that's why we only need 5 black notes. They were added in such a way to allow a perfect fifth or perfect fourth to be played above or below any other note on the keyboard. And that is why we don't need a note between E and F or a note between B and C. Because forcing some sort of B sharp note in between these 2 notes wouldn't give us access to any perfect intervals like a fourth or fifth. It would just introduce a whole bunch of weird microtonal intervals. Of course, let's not forget that this whole time we've not actually been talking about keyboard music. We've been talking about monks singing plain chant. But it was this musical system first developed for writing, categorizing and arranging plain chant that went on to become the basis of all Western music making, and thus the system that instruments like keyboard instruments were built around. This 12-note system has been around for a long time now. The earliest known example of an instrument with a modern chromatic keyboard layout like the one that you would recognise was an organ installed at Halberstadt Cathedral, Germany in 1361. So by the time that any other keyboard instruments like the harpsichord or the piano were developed, this keyboard of 12 notes, 7 white and 5 black, was already the well-established default, and despite the centuries has remained the default ever since. Now, one topic I haven't mentioned so far in this video is temperament.
This is really interesting because there's a lot of different factors that go into it, and you would never really think of all of that. But it really does make sense. Like if I thought about this specific topic logically for like give me like 4 hours, and I think I would come to the conclusion of everything else that we've gotten to. And I really enjoy the reasoning behind the B sharp and the E sharp not being there as being the chords and the harmonies. I think that reason is so much more valid than we just want a major scale. We just want it to look nice. I'm still only telling my student about the major scale thing because I feel like it's a little above the pay grade, but it kind of somehow puts my mind at ease, you know, just knowing that. It kind of gives me some peace and harmony. Yeah, got that peace and harmony? I'm just too funny sometimes.
Put simply, for a piece of music to be perfectly in tune, to be in what's called just intonation, the tuning of each note needs to be able to move and flex as the music is performed, which is something that can be done when singing a note, for example, but not when playing on a fixed tuned instrument like a piano, where adjusting the tuning in real time would be impossible. Now, some attempts were made historically to offer alternative tunings of each note on the keyboard to bring your playing closer to just intonation. Some keyboard makers experimented with split keys to offer two different tuning options for the same note. But ultimately, rather than adding more keys to the keyboard to offer multiple tunings of the same note, we settled on a tuning system on a temperament known as 12-tone equal temperament. And this is the tuning system that almost all music uses today. Yeah. To find out more about what 12-tone equal temperament is and why music performed on a piano is not perfectly in tune, check out this video I did previously. So that's why we don't have a black note here or here. We simply don't need these notes. But there is still one last thing I'd like to address in this video before the end. We've established now why we don't have a B sharp or an E sharp on our piano. But we can actually have a B sharp or E sharp on our sheet music. For example, here in Beethoven...
This is a great addition to it. I don't know, I've heard some reasons for it, but honestly, this is one of my biggest gripes, because why are you doing that to me? Why am I sight reading a sheet of music and there's a B sharp? Like, why? Why? There's no reason to. I feel like I hope he proves me wrong. There has to be a good reason. But why are you putting a B sharp in my music? Just put a C. Please just put a C. I feel like maybe if it's in a chord, but even if it's in a chord, like I would rather see a double sharp or a double flat than a B sharp or a C flat. It's just like, I feel like it's not supposed to be there ever. It just trips me out every time. There's no time where I'm seeing a B sharp in my music and I'm just being like, oh yeah, sure. Oh yeah, I have to play C. I'm gonna be like, where's the sharp? Where's the sharp? I hope it's not only me. I hope it's not me being like an incompetent pianist, but it has to piss other people off too, because why? This example is even worse, because not only does it have a B sharp, it has another B there that's still sharped from the same measure. That would absolutely like tick me off. Like I would turn off my keyboard for the day. Like I'm done practicing.
Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata, we can see a couple B sharps. So how are we meant to play these notes? Where do we find our B sharp note? Well, B sharp is actually just another name for C natural.
Who would have thought? Who would have thought, right? It's so crazy. Why?
Sharp effectively means just to rise by one semitone. So although this note on the keyboard is usually referred to as C, in some contexts we can instead refer to it as B sharp. So why do we do this? Why do we have a B sharp in our sheet music?
Please tell me why.
Even though it doesn't exist on our keyboard.
Tell me why.
Wouldn't it be easier just to call it C if that's what it's actually meant to be?
Well,
you'd think so, wouldn't you? But actually, based on the way that sheet music is written and the way that accidentals work in sheet music, it's actually more practical to describe this note here in Moonlight Sonata as a B sharp, rather than just calling it a C natural. Let me show you why. If we did notate these B sharps as C naturals instead, we would have to add a natural mark here, because the key signature is making all of the C's in this piece of music C sharps by default. But okay, whatever, let's put that natural mark in. What's wrong with that? Well, the problem is sharp, an accidental like a natural mark is in effect for the entire bar. It doesn't just affect this note, it affects every note on that line or space until we reach the bar line. So by putting this natural mark here, we've now inadvertently made this C here a natural, even though it was actually meant to be a C sharp. So to fix this, we're now going to have to add a sharp to this C.
Yeah.
But wait, there's more. Just like the natural mark, the sharp we've added also lasts for the entire bar, meaning that it's turned this C, that was a C natural, into a C sharp. So now we have to add another natural mark to undo that sharp. So as you can see, this has quickly become quite a mess. And this is why B...
Okay. For this specific context, I will let it slide. However, I've seen so much more unconventional context where they just put a B sharp in there, and I'm like, I would have been fine with a C, especially in the context where it's just the B sharp and there's no other C in the measure. Like, I don't see it, you know? I don't see it. I'm on a roll today. Anyways. Yeah, I guess it does make sense. From the writer's perspective, it does make sense. As a pianist trying to read that, I still don't like you for it. But I still would rather read it the other way. But maybe that's just my own discomfort with it, you know? That's my own gripe. That's my personal issue. But I guess I'll get over it.
Sharps can be useful. Even though reading the note B sharp might be a bit jarring at first, it's still a better solution than having to read such a mess of accidentals like this.
We need a name that's witty at first, but that seems less funny each time you hear it.
How about the B sharps?
Perfect.
Anyways, this was an amazing video. It really made my mind work. I liked it. I feel like it was really full of information. I came here for one thing. I ended up solving like 7 different issues that I had, musical issues that I had. And but yeah, check out David Bennett. He has so many very interesting videos, and I'll probably end up reacting to more of them. But yeah, check him out. Check him out. Anyways, if you enjoyed that video, hit the subscribe button, and what else? Hit the subscribe button and click the video on the screen, obviously. See you when I see you.